If you've watched pretty much any sporting event on TV where they pan to the spectators, you've seen the sign at least once, John 3:16, which is, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him might not perish, but might have eternal life." As we come to celebrate the great season of Lent, preparing for the celebration of Easter, at the heart of it really is that line, John 3:16. As I often say to people, Jesus came for one reason: not to make us good people, not to make us perfect in some way, not to ensure that our lives were never without trauma or heartache or brokenness, because all we have to look at the world to see that none of that has happened. Jesus came for one reason: that we might be saved. And he didn't come in spite of our sinfulness. It is our sinfulness that caused God to send his Son to us. For a simple reason: for God so loved the world. That's ultimately the message of Christian faith. Yes, we are sinners, and if we don't acknowledge that, then we can never truly accept Christ. We are broken, and we will choose to act in our lives in ways contrary to God's will, most likely early and often, if you're anything like me. As I often say to people, there's a reason I go to confession as often as I do. I don't come here as a perfect person. I come as a person who seeks and desires nothing more than that salvation that God has offered us through Christ. Because ultimately that is the only way to salvation. As we often hear in the scriptures, by no other name can one be saved, as it tells us in the Acts of the Apostles. And as Jesus himself says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Salvation is only possible through Christ. I'm not saying non-Christians aren't saved. How that happens through Christ, God hasn't told us, but the church has assured us that that is possible. But we who do know him, we who have accepted him, we who recognize the truth of who Jesus is, have a responsibility. A responsibility first to accept that salvation, to accept the depth of love that God has for us, because ultimately that is what it means to accept the salvation that Jesus has won for us. It is to accept God's love. For love consists of this: not that we have loved God, but that God has loved us. And ultimately, that is what the season of Lent and Easter are about. It is about opening our hearts, our minds, and our lives to the merciful and compassionate love of our God. But to do that, it's only possible through God's grace. We can't do it on our own. Without the grace of God opening our hearts, without God, in a sense, enticing us to him, we would be bereft. But there is one thing that can stand in the way of our entering into God's salvation. All we have to do is look in the mirror to discover what that block is. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is really this simple question. Am I cooperating with God to accept his salvation? Am I doing my part? And my part is not about good works, because we cannot earn, merit, or deserve salvation by anything we do. Salvation will always be a free and gracious gift that our God offers to us. Ultimately, our good works are our cooperating with what God is doing. It is allowing God to let us be his instrument in the world, to allow God's love that he is pouring into our hearts to be poured out into the world. Ultimately, we cannot be a dam of all that God gives to us, of his love, compassion, and mercy. Rather, the way we cooperate with God's salvation is to share that gift of salvation with others. That we become a conduit of God's compassion and mercy, a conduit of his love in the life of others. And that is what God is calling us to. And Lent is a good time to look at our lives to see if that is what we are doing. Basically, to look in the mirror and to see if I am allowing God to use me. Am I allowing God to be his instrument in the world? As we come then, because hard to believe, but Lent is very quickly approaching its end. And so let's take the next few weeks to truly look at ourselves, to look at the life we are living, to see if we are truly allowing God to use us. Because the ultimate reality is God has one purpose for us, and it is the same purpose that he had for Christ. That his salvation might be seen in and through us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him might not perish, but might have eternal life.